Before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because stories like this rarely get told the way they deserve to be told. Ron Howard's career stretches across more than 60 years, and in that time he has watched Hollywood evolve, collapse, rebuild, and reinvent itself again and again. He has stood in front of cameras as a child actor, sat behind them as a young director trying to prove himself, and later guided massive productions with the calm confidence of someone who had already seen it all. Yet despite the awards, the box office success, and the legendary collaborations, Ron Howard has always insisted that the most important lessons he learned did not come from studios or accolades. They came from people, from actors, from watching human beings expose parts of themselves that most of the world keeps hidden. Over time, 7 performers left impressions so deep that they reshaped how Howard understood truth, vulnerability, discipline, and the fragile magic that happens when someone truly disappears into another life. These weren't just professional experiences. They were human ones, and they stayed with him long after the sets were dismantled and the cameras stopped rolling. Ron Howard's understanding of acting was already unusual before he ever called action as a director. As a child on the Andy Griffith Show, he learned early how fragile performance could be, how easily authenticity could be lost if fear or ego took control. That awareness followed him into adulthood, quietly shaping the kind of director he wanted to become. He valued calm, collaboration, and emotional safety on set, believing that great performances came from trust rather than pressure. Over decades, that philosophy was tested repeatedly as he encountered actors who challenged his instincts, expanded his understanding, and sometimes forced him to adapt in ways he never expected. Each encounter became a lesson, not just about filmmaking, but about people. Some actors taught him restraint, others taught him courage, and a few taught him the cost of going too deep without protection. Together, these experiences formed an invisible education that shaped every decision he made behind the camera, influencing not only how he directed performances, but how he listened, observed, and respected the emotional risks actors take every time they step into someone else's pain. Russell Crowe entered Ron Howard's life carrying a reputation that made many directors nervous. Stories about volatility and intensity followed him into pre-production on A Beautiful Mind, and Howard knew he would have to navigate that energy carefully. But what he discovered wasn't recklessness or ego. It was obsession with truth. Crowe didn't approach John Nash as a role to be played. He approached it as a responsibility that demanded total immersion. He studied schizophrenia with an almost frightening precision, spoke to experts, observed patients, and internalized the emotional chaos that defined Nash's inner world. On set, Crowe questioned everything, from dialogue to camera placement, not to assert dominance, but to protect the honesty of the character. The atmosphere could grow tense, and Howard often found himself balancing the emotional temperature of the room while allowing Crowe the space he needed to stay connected. What stayed with Howard wasn't the difficulty, but the vulnerability. Between takes, Crowe looked drained, shaken, almost haunted by how deeply he had gone. He was willing to look broken, confused, and afraid without trying to appear strong or heroic, and Howard recognized that kind of courage as rare, costly, and unforgettable. Tom Hanks represented the opposite kind of power, and yet his impact on Ron Howard was just as profound. From their first collaboration on Splash, Howard noticed something quietly extraordinary about Hanks. He didn't chase scenes. He didn't demand attention. He stabilized everything around him. There was a grounded humanity in his presence that turned even the most chaotic moments into something emotionally coherent. Years later, on Apollo 13, that steadiness became essential. The film demanded precision, restraint, and emotional control, and Hanks delivered all three without ever making the performance feel calculated. He portrayed leadership not as bravado, but as responsibility, a man holding himself together so others wouldn't fall apart. Howard rarely needed to give detailed direction. Hanks adjusted instinctively, responding to the smallest cues with remarkable emotional intelligence. Over 5 films together, Hanks became the one actor Howard never worried about. No ego, no instability, no emotional unpredictability. Just preparation, generosity, and trust. In an industry fueled by tension, Hanks gave Howard something rare and deeply valued: peace. Michael Keaton entered Howard's world like controlled chaos. During night shift, Howard was still a young director trying to maintain order and confidence, and Keaton challenged every system he relied on. He treated scripts as suggestions rather than instructions, arriving with improvisations, physical comedy, and unpredictable rhythms that initially overwhelmed Howard. The early days were uncomfortable, even frightening, because Keaton's mind moved faster than traditional direction could keep up with. But slowly, Howard began to understand that Keaton wasn't being reckless. He was searching. He refused to settle for the first idea when he sensed something deeper might exist underneath. One scene evolved into countless variations, each revealing a different emotional angle, and Howard realized he was watching a master at work. Keaton showed him that spontaneity, when rooted in character, could uncover moments no amount of planning could manufacture. Even more striking was Keaton's ability to pivot from manic comedy to sudden emotional vulnerability. That duality shattered Howard's belief that comedy and seriousness lived in separate worlds. Keaton proved they were inseparable, and that lesson stayed with Howard for the rest of his career. Ed Harris brought an entirely different energy, one defined by discipline and precision. On Apollo 13, Harris approached his role like an engineer preparing for a mission. He didn't just learn lines, he learned systems. He studied NASA protocols, internalized technical language, and understood every procedure his character would reference. For Howard, this level of preparation was a gift. Harris never faltered, never needed excessive takes, and never treated technical complexity casually. That reliability allowed Howard to focus on the larger emotional architecture of the film. But beneath Harris's control was a quiet intensity that gave the character emotional weight. His eyes carried the pressure of responsibility, the awareness that lives depended on decisions made in seconds. Howard didn't direct that depth. It came from Harris himself. Watching him work reinforced Howard's belief that preparation wasn't about perfection. It was about freedom. When an actor knows their world completely, they can exist inside it truthfully without distraction or fear. Denzel Washington influenced Ron Howard without ever standing in front of his camera. Howard studied Washington's performances from a distance, fascinated by the way he commanded attention without demanding it. There was a gravity in Washington's stillness, a confidence in his silence that drew audiences in rather than pushing emotion outward. Howard understood how difficult that restraint was, especially in an industry that rewards volume and spectacle. Washington's power came from control, from knowing exactly when to do less. Howard also observed Washington's ability to balance authority with vulnerability, portraying strength without arrogance and pain without weakness. That balance reshaped how Howard directed other actors. He learned to trust quiet moments, to allow pauses to breathe, and to resist the urge to over-explain emotion. Washington showed him that presence wasn't about filling the frame. It was about grounding it, and that lesson quietly informed Howard's directing philosophy for years. Daniel Brühl surprised Ron Howard in ways he hadn't anticipated. During the development of Rush, Howard expected the film's energy to come from speed, danger, and spectacle. Instead, Brühl delivered its emotional core through restraint and precision. He studied Niki Lauda relentlessly, mastering his cadence, posture, and unfiltered honesty. Brühl refused to soften Lauda's rough edges, even when it risked audience discomfort. That refusal impressed Howard deeply. Many actors seek likability. Brühl sought accuracy. His performance was so precise that Lauda himself acknowledged its authenticity. Watching Brühl disappear completely into another human being reminded Howard that true transformation doesn't announce itself loudly. It reveals itself quietly, through detail, discipline, and respect for truth. That experience broadened Howard's appreciation for international actors and the different traditions they bring to storytelling. Anthony Hopkins represented the purest form of acting Ron Howard had ever witnessed. Observing Hopkins over the years, Howard was struck by his discipline, his stillness, and his refusal to decorate emotion unnecessarily. Hopkins memorized lines obsessively, not to sound perfect, but to eliminate hesitation until language became instinct. When the camera rolled, he wasn't performing. He was existing. The smallest shift in his eyes could communicate more than pages of dialogue. For Howard, this was a revelation. Hopkins taught him the danger of overdirecting and the importance of knowing when to step back. He also demonstrated that true greatness doesn't cling to legacy. Despite his status, Hopkins remained curious, vulnerable, and unprotected on screen. That humility moved Howard deeply and reinforced his belief that the best performances come from courage, not control. Across decades, these 7 actors reshaped Ron Howard's understanding of storytelling. They showed him that acting is not about dominance or perfection, but about honesty, preparation, restraint, and emotional risk. Some challenged him, some steadied him, and others taught him simply by being watched. Their influence became invisible threads woven into every film he made, shaping the way he listened, guided, and trusted the people in front of his camera. Howard's career may be defined publicly by success, but privately, it was shaped by these human connections. In the end, Ron Howard didn't just learn how to direct actors. He learned how to respect them. He learned how fragile their work is, how much courage it takes to reveal something real, and how easily that truth can be lost if not protected. That understanding is why he continues to believe that acting, at its best, is one of the bravest crafts in Hollywood. And it's why these performances stayed with him long after the lights dimmed, reminding him that the most powerful stories are built not from spectacle, but from human truth. Which of these performances stayed with you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us again for more untold moments from behind Hollywood's greatest careers.